Bueno, muchísimas gracias, Hester, por esa introducción. Le agradezco infinitamente que lo dijiste exactamente como te lo escribí. Así que, no, le agradezco sinceramente esa introducción tan amable. Y para mí es un placer estar aquí con este almuerzo de líderes latinos de la nación, con todo lo que vale y brilla en nuestra comunidad. Y como dijo Bobby García, qué increíble, qué pasos hemos dado en tan corto tiempo y lo que vamos a dar adelante en los días que nos quedan. Así que, let me, for the few friends who are here who might be terrorized that it might continue in Spanish, let me, this is a Latino Leaders Luncheon, so let me say that I am really pleased to be here once again. I want to recognize the distinguished, and one uses that term loosely, but in this case, the reality is he is a distinguished ambassador of Mexico, who I think does a fantastic job in a very difficult time in creating strong bonds between Mexico and the United States. Ambassador, it's great to have you here at our luncheon. Bobby Garcia, who is now responding to a higher calling, but had a very important calling when he served in the House of Representatives and was a trailblazer for so many people. We always appreciate Bobby Garcia's history and his commitment to people. And Bobby, it was great to have you here. And my dear friend and present member and the chair of BOPAC, which is trying to make sure that more of us serve in the United States Congress, that the Institute's new generation of leaders actually get a shot, and who has done such a fantastic job, Congressman Joe Baca of California. It is always great to be in his presence. And I'll just take the personal privilege of once again recognizing someone who is a very dear friend of mine, someone whose surname might not quite let you understand, but she is the first Hispanic Attorney General in the history of the state of New Jersey. We are incredibly proud of her. Governor Corzine has excellent judgment, as you can see, but Salima Farber, the Attorney General of the state of New Jersey. Let me congratulate Mickey for not his mini enterprise that he has, his mini kingdom, I should say, that he has created, but more importantly, mini empire, I should say. But more importantly, Mickey has not forgotten where he came from along the way. That is something that I personally admire. Sometimes in our communities, people succeed and then they forget. And I'm not very fond of that. I'm fond of remembering where you came from and making sure that there are doors open for others, not doors slammed behind you. And Mickey Ibarra is someone who is constantly opening the doors for people, and he brings us together in common cause for greater goals. Mickey, thank you so much for your vision in creating this luncheon. Let me thank Frank Ross from Coca-Cola, which I used to consume a lot of, now had to turn to Diet Coke. But we appreciate his sponsorship here, and Magda Rizadi, who's just a really both of them are fantastic people, but obviously Magda, she is from New Jersey, so I think she is incredibly fantastic for a variety of reasons, some which are very obvious, others which are obvious from her presentation as well, for hosting this latest installment of the Latino Leaders Luncheon series. And certainly it's been a great series. If you know, I was privileged to start it off in Boston when we were having the convention there, but then Senator Ken Salazar, my former colleague in the House, his brother John Salazar, the new mayor of Los Angeles, Antonio Villaraigosa. It's great. One of the great cities of the nation is led by an American of Hispanic descent who has a tremendous vision for transforming the opportunity of all the people in that great city, and of course our Attorney General Alberto Gonzalez. It is a great company to be in, and I'm glad to be back in return engagement in a new title. So let me congratulate everyone who's participated. And I want to just take one other moment before I get to the core of my remarks to recognize Ann Marie Tallman of MALDEF. She has done a fantastic job in her advocacy. I am not totally pleased that she is leaving, even though I know she is leaving the organization in good hands. And I know that there was some discussion earlier on immigration. I just believe it is unacceptable here in the nation's capital and throughout our country to depend on the work of so many Latinos for the economy of this country and then turn around and attack our communities and our families for partisan political gain. I personally have never found what is in the vision of those who seek to build walls instead of build bridges of opportunity. I don't think that we need a wall between Mexico and the United States. We need a greater engagement, not only with Mexico, but the rest of the hemisphere. Something that this administration, I've criticized previous administrations, so I don't look at it as a partisan remark, but simply has not been engaging in, and to believe that any fence or any wall will stop the human desire of people to seek opportunity is simply flies in the face of human history. And it is actually the worst foreign diplomacy policy I have ever seen us promote. And if we're going to build a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border, well, we'll have to build a wall upon where people on September 11th came in, and that is in the U.S.-Canada border. So I'm not for either one of them, but let's be honest about the reality. So finally, on that note, we need a smart policy, one that, yes, every country has the right and the obligation to make sure that it regularizes its border. And make sure that its border is secure. By the same token, we need an opportunity to make sure that those who are here in pursuit of the American dream can be brought out of the darkness into the light. Let's make sure who's here to pursue the American dream versus who might be here to destroy it. But overwhelmingly, I believe that people are here in pursuit of that dream. And that means we need not a ticket to deportation, but a pathway to earn legalization in our country. And hopefully, the voices of reason will rise up and explain this great reality for our country and move in a different direction than making immigration the wedge issue of 2006. I'll tell you this, for all of us who are citizens, particularly citizens from the Latino community, and others, because it was interesting, all along Capitol Hill there was people with shirts that said legalize the Irish. So this is not just a Latino. Very seriously, there are hundreds of people along Capitol Hill with shirts legalize the Irish. And in my hometown of Hoboken, New Jersey, the Irish have a long history, and there is a new wave of immigrants from Ireland. This country has a proud history of immigration. And it is that history that has so enriched this country. And while some of us came here involuntarily, and others of us came here in search of opportunity, and some flew here and others took boats here, and others have risked their life to get here, we are all in the same boat together today. And the sooner that we realize that, and our community needs to raise their voices, because those of us who have achieved the opportunity to fulfill that American dream. Sometimes it's a little upsetting to me that we sit in the luxury of our own circumstances, but if our parents and grandparents and forefathers had had that view, we would not be where we are today. So I hope we will raise our voices along the way. Now, I know this luncheon is a little bit about how some of our leaders achieved what we have achieved, and I think that maybe sharing a little bit, I know so many of you in the audience, but sharing a little bit of my personal history is part of who I am today, what I stand for, and what I believe this nation is, why it's the greatest nation in the world. You know, in my former congressional district and still within sight of where I live, Ellis Island, which was located in the district that I had the honor of representing for over 13 years in the House, has been a gateway to opportunity for millions of Americans. And for me, the island is a shining example of the power of the American dream, a place that launched millions down the road to success in a state that embodies the ideal that children from humble beginnings can grow up to achieve the same dreams as those of families from wealth and fame. Frankly, like many of you in this audience who I know, my story is very close to yours. My parents came to this country in search of freedom. They came to the greatest country in the world, and what they found is a country where people not only are free to pursue those dreams, but to also have the tools to help realize them. In America, freedom and opportunity are the keys that unlock success, not just for the rich or connected, but for anyone who is willing to work hard. My mother and father did not have an easy life when they came to this country. My mother was a seamstress in the factories of New Jersey. My father, when he was alive, was an itinerant carpenter. We grew up poor in a tenement building in Union City. And what got me involved in public life was actually an experience I had when I was in high school in my senior year. I was in a public high school, and I was told that because of my grades, I qualified to be in a senior honors program, but that, in fact, I had to cough up $200 for the books. As I said, my parents were poor. We lived in a tenement, and I did not have $200. And I couldn't understand for the life of me why I would be barred from entering into the honors program if I had the capacity but didn't have the money. So I created such a ruckus that they gave me the books, told me to shut up, and put me in the honors program. But to be honest with you, I didn't feel right about it because it was okay for me, but it wasn't okay for everybody else who may have not spoken up and exercised what should have been their rights. So the following year, when I graduated from the local public schools and was going to a Jesuit college in New Jersey called St. Peter's College, I started a petition drive to change the school board from one that was appointed by a very corrupt administration, hence they wanted my $200 and others, to one that was elected by the public. I spent a long, hot summer at the age of 19 with a group of my friends who felt similarly that they had been cheated of the education they should have received. And we got thousands of signatures on a petition drive to create a public referendum that we succeeded in passing at the age of 19. And then the following year, I ran at the age of 20 for the first school board elections in my hometown that we had created. And I ran against a priest, which in those days were allowed to run for public office. And I won, for which I'm still paying in church today. That was 32 years ago. Bobby, maybe you can help me. But it was the beginning of having a sense of standing up for what is right, even though it may be difficult, and even though it may not be popular. One of the things I was told, particularly by members of our community, was, pero esto no lo puedes hacer. Eres muy joven, la estructura política nunca te va a permitir cambiarlo, y no se puede. Y le dijimos, pero ustedes están equivocados. Sí, se puede. And we, in fact, not only changed the school board and succeeded in running, and at that time was the youngest person ever elected in the state's history to a school board, but more importantly, we began to transform the school district in its curriculum reform, in its pedagogical approaches, in its diversification of where we got our educators from. And we began to make progress in a school district that today is over 85% Hispanic. All of the children in that school district, 85% of them come from the Hispanic community. The school district is much better today because we created change so many years ago. And from that lesson, I came to understand that change doesn't necessarily come easy, and it doesn't come to those who are not willing to commit themselves to an ideal and willing to sacrifice to make that ideal become a reality. And so I then decided to change the city administration, and I stood up to a very corrupt city administration. And during this period of time, my life was threatened. I wore a bulletproof vest for 2 months of my life, and ultimately, in an effort to change the administration, on the day before the election, where I led a reform group to ultimately change the city, on the day before the election, the person who I was running against, this mayor, was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. And I lost the election the next day by 200 votes. The only election I ever lost in 32 years. The only election I intend to ever lose again, by the way. And I said to myself, well, what did the public think about me, that they wanted to vote for someone who had been sentenced to 7 years in federal prison? So I decided actually at that time to go practice law. I had gone to Rutgers Law School and graduated, go practice law, and decided to use the law as a vehicle to create social change. And what happened was that the people who followed me in this reform movement, school teachers, custodians, sanitation workers, everyday common people who wanted to see a change in their hometown, began to get fired by this administration. And so they ended up on my doorsteps saying, we believed in you, we followed you, and we are now hurt. What are you going to do? And that dragged me back into a process in which we litigated, along with a group of my friends who had also become lawyers by that time. We litigated their cases in state and federal court for wrongful dismission, for violation of civil rights, and a whole host of other efforts, and we regained their employment, and then 4 years later became the first Hispanic mayor in the state's history, ousting the rest of what was left of that corrupt administration. And I learned from those early days, whether it is reforming the school district, wearing a bulletproof vest to stand up for what you believe is right, even though it may not be easy and even though it may not be popular, that it has ultimately been my compass point in terms of what I continue to do and have done in the 13 years in the House of Representatives, and what I intend to do in the United States Senate. And you know, that belief drives me to take on a series of challenges that I believe we can head our country in a much better and positive direction. You know, I understand the power of education. You know, I am the first and only member of my family to go to college and to then go to law school. And I understand that it is the key to social mobility and economic opportunity in this country. And the reality is, I would not be before you today as a United States Senator if I didn't have that educational opportunity. But I also realize that the only way that I could afford St. Peter's College was because of something called Pell and something else called Perkins. And the reality is, but for the government creating an opportunity. You know, we can't guarantee equal outcomes, but we should guarantee equal opportunity. And it became very clear to me then that I would not have had those opportunities. And yet we are faced with a budget today that for the 5th consecutive year freezes Pell Grants, which now means that students in our country who mostly get, to the extent that they get assistance, gets it through Pell, can only afford what in essence was, at one time 80% of the value of a college education was paid by Pell. Today it's about 40% paid by Pell. And Perkins, if I didn't have the combination of Pell and Perkins and work through all 4 years of college, the reality is that Perkins would not have been, if it did not exist, it would have again probably made it impossible for me to go to college. In New Jersey alone, that's 15,000 students in which their future will be determined, largely, most of them, coming from our community and the African American community and women, in terms of the opportunity to fulfill their God-given potential that they have by virtue of getting this college education. And yet the President's budget eliminates Perkins totally. in addition to freezing Pell, and has the most significant cuts in the history of the Department of Education since it was created. A third of all of the cuts come from the Department of Education. In a world that has been transformed by technology, in which the boundaries of mankind have been largely erased in the pursuit of human capital, where in fact someone does an engineer's report in India and transmits it back to the United States, or reads a radiologist's report in Ireland and transmits it back to a doctor in some hospital. Or if you had a problem with your credit card, you probably ended up with a call center in South Africa. In a country and a world in which technology has transformed the boundaries of mankind in pursuit of human intellect, for the nation to be able to continue to be competitive and be the global leader, it needs to be at the apex of that curve of intellect. And so that means a robust and effective education system, one that creates opportunity for each and every one of our citizens. And that's what I intend to fight for in the Budget Committee as we mark up later this week, to try to make sure that we change the direction of what our priorities are and what our values are. And it's that same type of attitude from my experiences that led me to cast a vote that I think was very important, even though it was highly criticized at the time that I cast it. You know, votes on war and peace are also votes about life and death. And I have a standard. I am not willing to send my son and daughter if the conflict is not right. I am willing to send my son and daughter if the conflict is right. And if I'm willing to send my son and daughter, then I am willing to send your sons and daughters. But if I'm not willing to send my son and daughter, I'm not willing to send anyone else's son and daughter. And in that respect, I was willing to send Alicia and Bob, if it was necessary, to Afghanistan. That's where Osama bin Laden was. That's where al-Qaeda was. That's where the Taliban gave them sanctuary. That's where the perpetrators of September 11th were. Those are the people who killed 700 New Jerseyans and 3,000 Americans. And that was the right cause, and that was the right use of American force. And then when we had the most sophisticated army in the world, the most technologically advanced army in the world, and we had Osama bin Laden cornered in the hills of Tora Bora, difficult terrain, but nonetheless, we knew that he was there. We handed over to the warlords stacks of money, expecting them to they would hand him over to us, and instead he escaped. They took the money, and we are now still in search of the mastermind of the people who killed 3,000 people in the United States. And what did we do? We deviated our attention to another part of the world. And I'll tell you something, I sat in the intelligence room and I read documents that were available to members of Congress, and I didn't see any clear and present danger to the United States. I didn't see any imminent threat to the United States. And I have to be honest with you, desires of weapons of mass destruction, but evidence of weapons of mass destruction? No. And so I made a decision that it was wrong to vote for the war in Iraq, and I voted no, even in a district that lost 150 people of those 700 New Jerseyans, because I felt in my heart it was the right thing to do. At the time, I was criticized. Today, as we are on the cusp of civil war in Iraq, the very same people who came to criticize me, to their credit, have come to tell me you were right. And I tell you these stories because all of us in public service, and for those young people in the Institute, and all of you in your lives in which you may not be in an elected or even an appointed office, although many of you are, but even in the councils of the boardrooms of America, which I often look around and see no one sitting in from our community. The question is, will you stand up for what you believe in? Will you stand up for what you know in your heart is right, even though it may not be popular, even though it may not be easy? The course of human history has been changed by men and women who are willing to stand up for what is right, even though it is not easy. And that is what I ultimately think is the essence of leadership. And that's why I salute all of you who have come to this luncheon year after year. I hope that in your lives each and every day, you will choose to find within yourself, in whatever walk of life and whatever work you do, there is always a moment to stand up for what is right. And the question is, will you choose that moment, seize it, and make life better for everyone else? I choose to do that, and that's why I'm willing to fight for my seat in the United States Senate. Thank you very much for having me.